We, the philosophical descendants of those libertarians who were the founders of our nation, a nation formed for the sole purpose of protecting the rights of individuals, recognize that our political structure has drifted away from this singular legitimacy. We therefore recommit to the decentralization of authority and to limit the power of our government as required by the Bill of Rights. We pledge to our fellow Americans a Gold New Deal, a new relationship between us and what we will tolerate in our government, a government from which all we ask is to not impede each individual's shot at the American dream. To the rest of the world, we pledge a Gold New Deal in which America is a greater advocate for independence and self-rule, a more earnest partner in free trade and free travel, and a stronger leader in the pursuit of peace. Under the Gold New Deal, every state will have the right to exit from its present constitutional subjugation to future federal legislation, regulation, court decisions, and executive orders, and to remain a member state of the Union for purposes only of national defense, and to remain subject to taxation only for the purposes of supporting defense. Under the Gold New Deal, every state will have the right to nullify any existing federal regulation, executive order, and court decision, and any federal legislation that is not a power exclusively and explicitly granted by the Constitution itself. Under the Gold New Deal, we will cap government expenditure. The federal government will no longer have the authority to provide funds to states or local governments contingent on prescribed policy. Combined federal, state, and local government spending, including both discretionary and legislatively mandated, will be capped in the aggregate by a fixed proportion of GDP. Under the Gold New Deal, the federal government will have no direct taxation authority over any person. Federal government revenue will be received only from state governments. We will end the IRS. Under the Gold New Deal, discretionary monetary policy will be replaced by a constant growth rate rule for money supply. The balance sheet of the Fed will be transferred to the Treasury, which will have no discretionary authority to bail out banks or other corporations. Financial institution regulation will be competitive among government agencies and completely optional. We will end the Federal Reserve System. Under the Gold New Deal, we will end mandatory transactions. No government authority will exist to impose on private persons any obligation to enter into financial or savings, Social Security, or an insurance program. Any person enrolled in Social Security now will be provided an equitable option to exit any such program. Under the Gold New Deal, we will end discretionary war. No government authority will exist to impose force on any person inside or outside of this nation without a court order, a declaration of war, or urgent national defense. No authority will exist for the government to declare war or to enter into a military alliance without federal legislative approval and federal executive approval and approval by 2/3 of the states. Under the Gold New Deal, public funding of primary and secondary education will be attached to each child in full measure per pupil equal to the funding of public schools. Public schools will be allowed to phase out under market competition. Public funding of higher education, including student loans, will be eliminated. We will end public education. Under the Gold New Deal, the federal doctrine of qualified immunity will be eliminated, and no other restriction will be placed on the people's right to seek redress in court or through a duly appointed private oversight board. Law enforcement officers will be personally bonded by non-government insurance. Federal law enforcement, including the FBI, DEA, and ATF, will be eliminated. No warrant will have the authority to breach a private residence without advance notice, No private asset will be seized without a court order upon due process for showing debt. We will privatize and decentralize police accountability. Under the Gold New Deal, no government authority will exist to regulate control of an adult individual's body. No government will have the authority to impose a penalty of death, criminalize the use of drugs or other substances, draft into military service, or coerce vaccination or medical treatment. We will preserve the right to bodily autonomy. Under the Gold New Deal, no government authority will exist to regulate incorporated or associated or affiliated people in any manner different from individual persons. There will be no corporate bailouts, protection from court-ordered liability for a liable, no regulation of employment practices, corporate taxation, or any type of coercion to engage in or refrain from censorship of any privately controlled mode of communication. We will preserve corporate autonomy. Under the Gold New Deal, no federal elected representative or government official appointed by such a representative will remain in office any longer than 12 years. It's regrettable that the people's choice to elect anyone whom they prefer must be limited, but the imposition of term limits is an idea whose time has finally come.